want to go to my next guest. We're joined with Kit Klarenberg, another one that does fantastic work. Kit Klarenberg is an investigative journalist documenting state crimes against democracy. You can check him out at Wolf One, the Gray Zone UK, and the other site I just had up. There it is, Global Delinquents. Both of those, you'll find Kit's work. How you doing, Kit? You doing okay this morning?
Well, I mean, I'm grand, but I'm just insulted that you would suggest that Mark is superior to me. I mean, that is a very harsh intro. I'm kidding. Mark is absolutely fantastic. No, I'm well. I'm dying slightly in the Balkan heat, but
just to be clear, it was not a comparison. I'm just saying that Mark has some of the best analysis anywhere, and yet there are other people who get, for whatever reason, more. Put it this way: there are people who are more bombastic than Mark that always get things wrong, whereas Mark is usually the black pill that usually gets it more right. No, man, I'm glad that you could join me. I really am. I always appreciate you joining me. One of the interesting things you put out it wasn't really an article, it was a comment, but there was an article that came out following it. Had to do with BlackRock apparently realizing, hey, we've been trying to get this massive amount of money for Ukraine, and we don't even know if there will be a Ukraine. So maybe this is not the best of ideas. Yeah. It's funny to me that they're just coming around to that analysis or that conclusion, something that, a year or so ago should have already been clear. But go into this for me. I'm fascinated by this. BlackRock, Ukraine was going to effectively this kind of disaster capitalism model where they're thinking, hey, this place has been destroyed. We can make a ton of money buying up all of this stuff that Ukraine is going to effectively give up after the war. And I guess at some point they believed that there was going to be a Ukraine left that they will be able to do this with. And I guess they've come to the conclusion, not so much, especially since they don't really have American vendors joining in with them on this. Well, go into it for me.
Yeah, sure. So I think that, the top line is that on July 5th, Bloomberg, which is, it is worth reading as far as mainstream publications go, it reported that a BlackRock administered fund for Kiev's reconstruction, which was due to be unveiled, with much hype at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome on July 10th and 11th this week. But Bloomberg acknowledges that the fund had been placed on hold at the start of this year due to a lack of interest among international investors. As this grand summit looms in Italy, the project's future remains uncertain because people are not willing to put a single dollar into this fund that was meant to run to many billions of dollars. Now, that's the kind of breaking news aspect of this. But I think it goes back a lot further to in the immediate aftermath of Maidan. Of course, we had the Victoria Nuland appointed fascist interim government that was replaced in June 2014 by the far right Petro Poroshenko's administration. And then, of course, in 2019, we get Zelensky standing on a peace platform, and we see how that turned out. But the point is that ever since the Maidan coup, successive Ukrainian administrations have passed sweeping laws allowing for the privatization of state-owned or nationalized industry, of which there's an enormous amount in Ukraine, large and small, but also Ukraine's vast agricultural lands and potentially untapped mineral wealth. This has been extremely unpopular with the Ukrainian population. It's proved very controversial amongst Ukraine's political class. Now, the outbreak of the proxy war and the imposition of martial law allowed Zelensky's government to begin passing legislation without any opposition. This is Zelensky, of course, has banned opposition parties for voting the wrong way in parliament. or the Rada, as it's known in Ukraine. But the point is that throughout 2022, as I say, Zelensky passed all of these laws intended to make privatization as easy as possible for foreign investors and to sell off, like vast amounts of Ukraine's arable agricultural land, which is equivalent to about a third of the total in the European Union. I mean, which is like pretty extraordinary. Like Ukraine was, of course, known as the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Now, in January 2023, the World Economic Forum had its annual conference in Davos, Switzerland, and the tone was effusively pro-Ukraine throughout the 5-day conference. Russia was banned from attending. You had Zelensky make multiple different addresses via video link. There were several panels talking about the necessity of arming Ukraine and funding its reconstruction. And there was its centerpiece, so to speak, was this kind of breakout breakfast where political and corporate bigwigs from across the Western world sat in, and Zelensky personally thanked BlackRock and Goldman Sachs for buying up his country during wartime, and he boldly promised, everyone can become a big business by working with Ukraine. And then subsequently, BlackRock's chief executive Larry Fink floated the idea of a reconstruction fund for Ukraine, which is this development fund. This Ukraine development fund that is now no longer happening per Bloomberg. Now, it was admitted that this is a previous Bloomberg report, that it was launched in May 2023, this fund, and there was widespread expectation that the forthcoming counteroffensive by Ukraine would end the war, and then Western corporations could then rape and pillage Ukraine's economy without hindrance and whatnot. Of course, the counteroffensive was an absolutely catastrophic failure in which Ukraine suffered maybe 100,000 casualties, lost an enormous amount of the Western weaponry, vehicles, armor, ammunition that they've been provided for absolutely nothing. And senior BlackRock executives have admit that this scared off international investors. And I think that with the death of this fund, it represents the wider collapse of a long-held dream by Western governments and corporations to break open Ukraine for asset stripping, privatization, effective seizure of its vast resources at bargain rates. And I might add that the British Foreign Office, in openly available documents on its quote-unquote aid programs to Kiev, it states that London viewed Russia's invasion not only as a crisis but also as an opportunity, and that the aid operation's primary purpose is to create a economy that's more conducive to foreign investment and increase trade opportunities for Britain. So, it looks like that fantasy has hit a brick wall, and it does tend to suggest the lack of interest in this Ukraine Recovery Fund. I think it feeds into the fact that increasingly governments and particularly populations across the West are sick of this. They want it over. It looks like Russia is starting to mount a pretty devastating and effective offensive where they're capturing large amounts of territory on a pretty much daily basis. The West doesn't have any weapons left to give them. Indeed, the US has announced that it will send no further weapons to Ukraine at all. Overall, the development fund's stuttering collapse reflects that Western capitalists know that Ukraine's kind of post-war corpse, like whatever remains of the country, is not going to give them anything to pick at. Because it's just, I mean, the longer this goes on, the more likely that the entire country is basically razed to the ground becomes more and more likely.
Yeah, it's wild to me. I mean, effectively, they looked at this as a business opportunity. It's like, hey, we have a submissive government. That submissive government will effectively privatize pretty much anything. We can get a fund and we can make a ton of money off of the corpse of Ukraine. And somewhere along the way, they realized, well, wait a minute, we don't know what is even going to be remaining of Ukraine. I mean, Russia just took this massive lithium deposit. You have a huge amount of the best territory that's in Ukraine that is now in Russia's hands. And so the longer this goes on, the less territory that's going to be remaining. And any notion of a deal seems to be off the table. Russia seems to be in the mindset of unconditional surrender, which means that any private interests would have to go through Russia, not Ukraine, if it wants to make any kind of deal at all. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, no, absolutely. And I think that, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I mean, and this is actually something that I've been saying for a very long time, that there are, you know, precedents for this in the past where, like, I mean, I think we may have even discussed it, but, you know, the war in Bosnia, which was deliberately provoked and sustained by the US. It was kept going for an unnecessarily long period of time, and their Bosniak proxies were encouraged to reject every peace deal that was put to them. You know, once they got bored of this in late 1995, they turned around to the Bosniaks and said, right, well, you're completely dependent on us for military and financial aid. You have to accept whatever we put to you. And if you don't accept it, we're just going to abandon you. Not even that seems to be happening now. Like, I think it is well understood that, yes, that Ukraine has basically been thrown to the wolves here, like, completely. The US doesn't seem remotely interested in what's happening. I mean, at a governmental level, like I say, you know, on June, I believe it was June 10th, like Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary, he stated that we are not going to send any new weapons to Ukraine whatsoever, and any remaining Biden era commitments, that's your lot, basically. And then on July 1st, the US, when after this weaponry had landed in Poland, recalled various things that were meant to be sent to Ukraine at Biden's direction, or whoever was actually controlling Biden. It certainly wasn't himself. You know, so that they literally are all out of US weapons. And European defense firms say it's going to take years for them to pick up that shortfall. I'm not sure there's going to be any Ukraine left in a few years' time at this rate. So, I mean, we'll see how long this can continue. You know, of course, and you know, there are European powers do seem pretty determined to keep this going, but, you know, with what soldiers, with what weaponry? And in a bitter irony for the British, who have since the proxy war erupted, and they, you know, this is a conflict they deliberately provoked and wanted to happen.
Yes.
They have covertly subscribed to a strategy of keeping Ukraine fighting, quote unquote, for at all costs for as long as possible. Now, in the process, they have made any prospect of themselves getting a decent, easy return from an investment in Ukraine basically impossible. Right. So, like, I mean, they've shot themselves in the foot here. And I might add that, yes, you know, of course, as we well know, you know, Boris Johnson personally sabotaged the peace talks in April 2022, which could have ended this. And then before the relatively recent renewed peace talks in Istanbul, there was that quite clearly British inspired drone attack on Russian strategic bombers, etc. So, you know, like, it's a total shit show for want of a better word. Like, the longer this goes on, the more that Ukraine is going to be ground down. A key consideration for investors as well, on top of the potential returns from reconstruction, is they're going to need people to work for Ukrainians to work for Western corporations for subsistence wages. They're going to need at least some skilled workers still, resident of Ukraine. Now, according to the Ukrainian government's own figures, the country has lost 40% of its working age population due to the proxy. So I as I say, I strongly suspect that, with no chance of a negotiated settlement on the horizon, I think Russia's into the mindset of this needs to be finished permanently on the battlefield, coupled with the fact that, whatever's left of Ukraine is probably going to be up to a significant extent under Russian administration. If Western capitalists do want to try and make some cash out of the smoldering wreckage of Ukraine, they're probably going to have to speak to the Kremlin.
Not probably, they will. Because it's wild. It's so wild to me. Oftentimes you would have people who are heavy into finance. They would say all wars are bankers' wars. And I would say, yes, kind of. There are people with geopolitical interests that also dovetail with that stuff. And if you're looking at this is a really good example. It would have been in good sense to make a legitimate deal with the Russians. Well, again, Russians complained about Putin and his willingness to make deals, as opposed to dude, finish this on the military. You have the capability of doing it, do it. Whereas Putin is more diplomatic. And they hit him for that, weirdly enough, in Russian, even though, by the Western standards, Putin's this kind of God man, iron fists, brimfire breathing maniac. Whereas from the Russian point of view,
the omnipotent Putin who controls everything.
It's fascinating the way they consider him as compared to Russia, who's he's too willing to make deals. He's too willing to make agreements. He took too long to move in regards to after Maidan. All of these things. Right here, this is the thing that you mentioned about 40% of Ukrainians are effectively gone, either dead or left.
And that might be an underestimation, because the Ukrainian government does not publish accurate figures on its own battle losses, so it may even be bigger.
And that's not just battle losses. That's people who fled, people who left because they saw the war coming, people who, as you point, battle losses. That's all of it. That's an astonishing number when you think that's the death of a country, right? You would think that if the objective was financial, that they would have said, okay, let's come up with a decent deal that the Russians would accept. Let's put an end to this. And now let's go for our raping of the remainder of Ukraine. But that's not the way they're thinking about this. They're thinking about this purely through this kind of geopolitical lens of, we need to stick it to the Russians, to the last dead Ukrainian. And as I keep telling people, the last dead Ukrainian that fires a shot doesn't mean they win the war. It just means the guy died. And yeah, from the Russian point of view, Trump can't be trusted. The deal that Trump is putting on the table is nonsense. The idea that the loser gets to dictate terms is off the table. It's just weird. And so it seems that from the Russian point of view, we will keep going until we complete our objectives. And those objectives often boil down to the unconditional surrender for Ukraine. So this can't be a financial thing. This has to be more of a geopolitical issue. Europe has to know that Ukraine is getting crushed in this. And you talk about losses of 1.5 million people. Why do you think they want to keep going with this? Is it to give themselves time to build up their own European military to fight the Russians? Or is there something else that I'm just fundamentally missing in this? Because otherwise it makes no sense to sacrifice this country like this.
Well, I mean, I think it's a number of factors, and I mean, there is almost certainly an aspect of of European thinking, which is, well, we're biding time until we're ready to face the Russians. Although, I mean, we're looking at decades, and I don't think Ukraine can hold out that long. But it's also, as well, as I think that there is this contradictory, notion at the core of this, which is, like I mentioned, like Britain is committed to keeping this going as long as possible in this belief. I've reported on the activities of Project Alchemy, which is this secret British Ministry of Defence military and intelligence cell, which was responsible for planning the Krinky disaster, and what has been pushing for relentless escalation and all manner of skullduggery, because they fundamentally believe that it will result in the fall of Putin and the breaking up of Russia into easily exploitable chunks. But yes, that like in the process, in doing this, they are not only actually strengthening Putin's position and rallying the population behind him. The sanctions have boosted in many areas have strengthened the Russian economy, because things that were previously done by foreign firms or made by foreign firms are now made by Russian companies. And also, like Russian oligarchs have been forced to move all their money back to Russia after Putin demanding they do so for 20 years and then refusing. So, like, they seem so utterly determined to try and trigger this destruction of Putin's Russia, that they can't see the reality staring them in the face, which is that these actions have been massively counterproductive. Now, I mean, in leaked Project Alchemy documents we've reported on at the Grey Zone, they acknowledge that their secret war against Russia's Black Sea fleet in the Black Sea, of course, is creating a cost of living crisis in the UK because it's disrupting the flow of grain. They acknowledge that the sanctions on Russia are going to hit British voters in the pocket, and oh boy, when I speak to my friends back in the UK, most of them are in a very bad way indeed economically. Like on a personal level, but they know that these are devastating upshots of what they're doing, but they keep on doing it anyway. There is a total lack of logic, and like I say, okay, we see the war in Ukraine as a business opportunity, and our key objective is to try and make Ukraine safe for Western investment. I've reported previously on how a now defunct British government agency called UK Aid was running secret propaganda campaigns in Ukraine, trying to sell locals on the benefits of having all of their employment rights destroyed under legislation passed by Zelensky. They engaged advertising agencies and PR professionals to really sell them on, like the quote unquote gig economy and signing away guaranteed holidays and all sorts of other rights and protections that they previously enjoyed. But then also they are reducing literally reducing Ukraine's workforce on a daily basis. And we've recently had this probably as a prelude, I think, to all-out conscription of 18 to 21-year-olds, which is the smallest demographic in Ukraine by some margin. There was an optional scheme whereby, in return for massive cash inducements and all sorts of other rewards, 18 to 21-year-old male Ukrainians could sign up. A couple of hundred of them did. Like people don't want to fight this war, and there are, as again I think we've discussed previously, the mainstream media has been forced to admit there are entire cities and towns and villages in Ukraine that don't have male populations anymore, because people are in hiding from conscription. They fled. I see frequently videos of Ukrainians celebrating having gotten into Romania, often by doing stuff like moonwalks, which is quite amusing. But yeah, like, you know, and also a large amount of their male population has been killed. You know, often in British-directed catastrophes like Krinky or Kursk or the 2023 counteroffensive, and it's like, well, there isn't really a strategy there. There's certainly not a coherent, rational strategy there, is there?
It doesn't seem to be. It seems like they assume they'd win. Like their opinion of Russia, it's Nigeria with snow, it's a gas station masquerading as a country. It seems like they believed all that stuff. And so they figured, okay, well, we'll economically destroy them while Ukraine can beat them on the battlefield. And at the point where they realize, holy shit, none of this stuff is true, none of the stuff worked, well, at that point, you're in too deep. And you're stuck with all of the stuff of, well, NATO has been preparing for this battle for 50 years, and they are getting crushed. How do we pull out of this with NATO remaining saving face? Okay, well, you don't. How does the U.S. extricate itself from this as its primary backer and you save face? You don't. Like, you don't get to have your way after starting a war that gets like over 1 million people killed. And so they don't seem to be able to back out of it. They just keep plowing forward. And I think the biggest issue here, more than anything else, is that these are not European troops that are fighting. These are Ukrainian troops. And so you effectively have Ukrainians fighting on behest of the West, which means that we don't have a direct connection between the people who die. It's not like, you know, like if, like for example, when Donald Trump was bombing Yemen, and it got to the point where 2 fighter jets fell off the aircraft carrier, they nearly knocked the F-35 out of the sky. And Trump was stuck with this thing of, okay, what happens if they sink an aircraft carrier on my watch? Okay, well, I don't want to deal with that. That's humiliating. So let's call this a day and let's just, you know, you can attack Israel, just don't attack American ships. Like, meaning when there's a direct correlation where there's a feedback mechanism between the people who you lose and the public's point of view of the fact that you lost those people. Okay, well, that's different. That creates a leash on the way that the administration focuses, whether that's Britain, America, or Germany or anywhere else. But what happens when that feedback mechanism is not there? The people who are dying are effectively Ukrainians. And we, our own politicians, have argued, hey, we just give the money, even though these are not American lives that are being lost. This is a great bargain. We've said it openly here. We've had several politicians say it openly. We don't care about Ukraine. I don't think Europe cares about Ukrainians. So from their point of view, it's just Ukrainians dying, which is ironic because the people who you find waving the flag of Ukraine the most are the ones that care the least about them. It's very bizarre. Well, it's not bizarre. I mean, it makes sense. There's a logic to it. But as you point out, this stuff is contradictory. A, you want financial interests. By the same token, you can't end the war in a way that would give you financial interests for geopolitical machinations. It's just wild. It's just wild.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the thing, is that, like, you know, I mean, you mentioned that the US can't just step away from this. I mean, I actually think that they can. Like, I mean, to be honest, I mean, that's it. Said
hard,
very long.
It's hard.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
Well,
sorry, but I'm just saying it's hard for an American president to do it.
Well, but that's the thing. But that's the thing, though, is that, like, I mean, as you mentioned, like, this is kind of what happened with the it's what happened with Trump's failed renewed hostility against Ansarallah at the start of this year. But it's also, I would argue, what happened with the recent exchange with Iran, where it's very, very clear that what happened, and this is, you know, this has been confirmed by a leaked Defense Intelligence Agency assessment, is that the US pulled off this, like, pretty meaningless and pointless and potentially forewarned strike, not using B-2 bombers, which they didn't dare use in Yemen, not using literally earth-shattering bunker busters, but they fired, you know, a bunch of missiles pointlessly at alleged Iranian nuclear sites, and they are aggressively despite the Trump administration, despite the DIA assessment that this was pointless and didn't achieve anything, they are really and very aggressively doubling down on the notion that, oh well, we completely obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Now, that's a very effective way of getting the US out of nuclear negotiations with Iran, which were going nowhere anyway. They can say, well, we destroyed the source of our consternation and disagreement, no need for further negotiations, and then move on and chalk that up as somehow a victory when it wasn't. And it's like I have said for a very long time, I can imagine the Ukraine war ending with US officials just simply ignoring its existence. Just pretending it's not happening, just pretending it's not happening anymore. And I mean, like I say, I mean, I've not seen any major statements from any US official since Hegseth announced that they wouldn't be getting the Biden era arms shipment commitments. I've not really seen any of that. And in the meantime, Europe is kind of just stuck in this bind where, like, there's a lot of very hostile rhetoric emanating from Paris and London and Germany and Brussels, but it's backed by nothing.
Right.
They don't have the military forces. They don't have the capabilities to go to war with Russia. There was an absolutely astonishing clip of it was a senior British, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I've sadly forgotten the precise quote, but there was a senior British military official who was grilled on by a parliamentary defense committee, similar to in the US context, a Senate or congressional committee, and they were this British military official was asked, well, in a hypothetical scenario, if Britain had to go to war alongside Ukraine against Russia, could and would we do it? And this official, in this kind of like Orwellian gymnasm, said, well, we would be ready to fight immediately if the call came up, but we understand that there would be severe problems with us doing this. Which is like a kind of like, rather euphemistic way of saying, well, yeah, like we would throw ourselves into the meat grinder, but we would be immediately killed, and we wouldn't be able to do this. But it's complete insanity. And I do think that the US has just left Europe to pickle themselves over all of these arguments over what to do and whether they can do it. And meanwhile, we're seeing Russia make, as I say, significant advances every single day and target Kiev and other major cities with absolutely devastating, completely undefended missile and drone strikes. I think this could be over a lot sooner now that the US money and weapons have stopped flowing and shan't restart. Let's see how much longer this can last.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that. Mark disagrees with me on this. I think this is going to be over with a lot sooner than I think people realize. I think when the collapse comes, it's going to come fast. But I could be wrong, so who knows? Like when they pull women and then they pull children and they pull, in order to keep this thing going. I don't know. The Iran thing, I guess my thought is Donald Trump, if that was the case, Trump could have walked on day one. Trump doesn't want to be blamed for Ukraine's collapse, which what I don't think he quite gets is that he will be blamed for Ukrainian loss because he didn't walk on day one. Meaning there's irony to it. It's like, well, I don't want to be blamed for a collapse, so I want to keep going and try to make a deal. Missing the fact that you have no cards. Like, unless you're willing to accept Russian terms, which an American president can't accept, which means he was better off just walking on day one. This is Joe Biden's war. I'm out. I said I was going to be out. I'm done. He didn't want to do that. And so now he has to own it. And what he's going to own is effectively a loss. On the Iranian point, the Iranian point is more interesting. Trump is weird on this one because this was very contradictory to me, and I didn't quite understand it. It's like, obviously, the U.S. was perfectly willing to try to overthrow the Iranian government. That was the entire point of all of this. And apparently somebody told Trump, hey, the Israelis can do it. Our fingerprints won't be on it. We could just sit back within a couple of days. It'd be a sharp, blunt overthrow. And of course, Israel put everything into it in regards to the Mossad agency, probably CIA agents and all that stuff internally to Iran. And you got this attack, unprovoked, out the blue, sneak attack that was taking place. So the notion that the US's hands weren't on it is nonsense. And it became very clear within a couple of days that the US hands were all over it. Consider Trump was on Twitter crowing, they should have taken our deal. We told them to take our deal, blah, 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 blah. Then, but within 2 or 3 days, it switched. And Trump is like, the US had nothing to do with this, so don't attack our ships. We'll be very angry if you do. Because at that point, it dawned on him, oh, the government is not collapsing. And B, Iran is making damage to Israel in a way that we did not expect or countenance, nor do we realize their military capability was what it was. And so what you ended up with was an Israel that was economically falling apart, that was getting hit over and over and over again in a way and the level of damage that it did not expect to take. And the US comes in to save Israel's ass. That's what effectively happened. They come in, they make these attacks. As you point out, I don't even know if they use bunker busters. I'm inclined to believe they didn't. Just looking at the Fordo site with satellite imagery, it didn't seem like that's what took place. But let's say they did. Let's say they did. Obviously, they gave Iran some kind of forewarning about it, and Iran gave them forewarning that they were going to attack those sites. What is it? El Duaib base or basically the base in Qatar. Yes. It was theatrics, but the theatrics wasn't purely theatrics. It was also a message to Iran to stop. Enough. You've damaged our proxy. What's interesting to me is Donald Trump's reaction versus Israel's reaction. Trump's reaction is, it's all done. They've been totally destroyed. They weren't able to get the stuff out. There's no more nuclear material. Everything is good. We could just call it a day. Israel's response is, we don't believe it's over with. We believe they moved the material out. We need further attacks, and we need the US to back us in further attacks. Okay, these are two very weird perspectives, considering that the US, I don't believe for a moment that Israel is a proxy. I'm sorry, Israel is a proxy of the US. They can't do anything without the US consent. And yet, you have the US effectively saying, okay, we want to call this a day. I find it very bizarre. It's very, very bizarre. I would imagine at this point, Israel knows that it can drag the US into a war, regardless of what Donald Trump says. So give me your take on that. And this could be the last point. Because, like I said, I assumed that Israel was going to attack Iran with the US blessing, even though a lot of analysts thought that was irrational. I was like, what if this you believe is rational? Like, the US has had a concerted effort all throughout the Middle East to destroy all of these governments. It was clear as day that Iran was the last one standing. At the point where they took down Syria, they had a direct path to it. Obviously, they were going to take their shot at Iran. Is it just that the US, in their mind, okay, you took your shot, you failed. But in Israel's mind, we need to keep going. Give me your take on this. I mean, do you think there's a dichotomy in the way that both of these sides are looking at these things, where there is, let's say, a left, but Donald Trump doesn't want to be left holding the bag, if there is indeed a larger response by Iran going after its proxy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that even though Netanyahu has indicated a willingness and a desire to keep this going, and Trump has said that he would, without question, bomb Iran again, actually, I think that the US and Israel are on the run on this. I mean, you know, that after the initial boasts that they were going to trigger regime change in Iran, and that they were operating in Iranian airspace without hindrance, and they killed all these IRGC commanders and these nuclear scientists, within just a few days they were in real trouble. And they weren't only in real trouble because Iran was battering population centers and military sites without hindrance. They were also in trouble because they were running out of air interceptors by I think it was within just a few days. They were burning through money. I mean, the cost of keeping this going was apps and Israel's economy is already battered. Like, I mean, it's it's a husk.
Yes.
They couldn't keep this going. A large proportion of their population was in bunkers every night. A large proportion of their population fled to Cyprus. The idea that they could sustain a longer engagement is complete fantasy. And I might add that that one of the reasons that the Biden era aid commitments to Ukraine were rescinded was because the conflict against Iran burned through so much difficult and expensive to replace precision munitions.
20 years.
In 20 days. And on, I mean, also as well, just as a closing point, on the subject of not wanting to own losses and things ending quicker than we might expect. What a lot of people do forget is that in June 2021, the Ghani, the Afghan puppet president, he visited Washington, D.C. and had all of these smiling photo ops with Biden, and White House spokespeople talked of the U.S.'s enduring commitment to an inclusive, stable, democratic Afghanistan. 2 months later, Ghani's on a plane to the UAE with a suitcase full of stolen money, and he's never been heard of again. And then the media just completely forgot about Afghanistan, which we'd been told day in, day out for 20 years that we were on this righteous mission there to create a progressive state. And then that crumbled within 24 hours, and then it just dropped off everyone's radar onto the next thing. So I think that's important. It's important to bear in mind when we discuss these things, because I again said this before, but I will repeat it because it never gets less true. The greatest trick the US empire has ever pulled is convincing people it hasn't lost a war when it hasn't won one. Like in history, like it's usually run away one way or another with its tail between its legs, and through a combination of spin and propaganda and just ignoring elephants in the room, they've managed to convince people otherwise.
Well, you have plenty of Americans that believe that the United States won the Second World War, which is just mind-blowing to me. No, man, you make a really good point. When we finish playing with our toys, this sounds so glib, but it's true. When we finish playing with our toys, we move on and we don't think twice about it afterwards. Kit, man, you are fantastic. Thank you for this. Kit Klarenberg, investigative journalist documenting state crimes against democracy. You can follow Kit on Gray Zone UK and Global Delinquents. Check out both. Global Delinquents, he has all of his articles and everything else there. It's coming up as Klarenberg.com, but put in Global Delinquents, it will show up.
Yeah. That's how you find it via Google. You can't find it searching by name. So search for Global Delinquents. But yes, thank you very much, Jamal. God bless you.
Oh man, thank you. You have a good one, man. Be safe. All right.